The sun had barely climbed above the trees when Daniel Harper carried the first cardboard box out of his garage. The air smelled fresh with a touch of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and for the first time in months, Daniel wasn't wearing his badge, his gun, or his usual serious look. Instead, he wore an old gray t-shirt with faded letters and a baseball cap turned backward. He had been looking forward to this day all week, his first garage sale in years. After working long shifts at the precinct, dealing with endless paperwork and difficult cases, he needed a break. This weekend wasn't about police work or investigations. It was about decluttering the house, chatting with neighbors, and maybe even enjoying a cup of coffee in peace. His wife, Laura, stepped out carrying a tray of mugs and a thermos. "You sure this is how you want to spend your day off?" she teased, setting the coffee down on a small folding table. Daniel smiled. "It's either this or I sit inside thinking about all the junk we never use." She laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Fair enough. But I'm telling you, nobody's buying that old lawnmower. It barely runs." "Oh, someone will," Daniel said with confidence. "You'd be surprised what people find useful." They spent the next hour arranging things neatly: an old toolbox, a set of mismatched kitchen plates, camping gear they hadn't used in years, and several boxes of books Daniel promised he'd read someday but never did. There were even a few pieces of furniture: a small wooden dresser, a side table with a chipped corner, and a lamp that flickered occasionally but still worked fine. By 8:30 a.m., the first neighbors started to stroll by. Mrs. Jenkins from next door, a sweet lady in her 70s, stopped to look at some picture frames. "Morning, Danny. I didn't know you were having a sale today," she said cheerfully. "Morning, Mrs. J. Just trying to clear some space in the garage," he replied. She picked up a frame and smiled. "Oh, this would look perfect in my hallway." "How much?" "Tell you what," Daniel said with a grin. "You take it for $2 and I'll even throw in the glass cleaner." Mrs. Jenkins chuckled. "You've got yourself a deal." Laura poured her a cup of coffee and the three of them chatted for a bit, the sound of friendly conversation mixed with the soft hum of morning traffic. Everything felt calm, ordinary, and good, just how Daniel liked it. But of course, peace doesn't last long in every neighborhood. A few houses down, someone had just noticed the setup in Daniel's driveway. Her name was Karen Miller. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, the self-appointed guardian of the homeowners association. She wasn't a bad person exactly, but she had a reputation for taking rules way too seriously. If a lawn grew an inch too high, she noticed. If a mailbox looked faded, she'd send a friendly reminder email. She had even once complained about someone hanging a holiday wreath too early in the season. Karen believed she was keeping the community in order. Most people, though, just thought she was looking for things to complain about. When she saw Daniel's driveway lined with tables and boxes, she frowned immediately. "A garage sale?" she muttered to herself. "On a Saturday? Without notice?" She walked to her living room window, peering through her blinds like a detective on a stakeout. She spotted a few cars parked along the curb, some with out-of-town plates. Her lips tightened. "This is exactly how neighborhood standards start to fall apart," she said under her breath. She went to her desk, pulled out the HOA handbook, a thick binder full of highlighted sections and sticky notes, and flipped through it. Her finger stopped on one line that said, "Residents are encouraged to notify the HOA of any community sales or large gatherings to maintain order and parking availability." She read it twice, nodded to herself, and said, "Exactly what I thought. No one told me about this." Meanwhile, Daniel was busy helping a young couple load a coffee table into their car. "Watch your step there," he said as he lifted one side. "It's heavier than it looks." They thanked him and handed him a $10 bill before driving off. Laura waved goodbye to them, then turned to her husband with a smile. "See? You said someone would buy the old stuff." "Yep," Daniel said proudly. "At this rate, the garage might actually have space for the car again." Just as he said that, a familiar sound of footsteps approached, quick, sharp, and determined. He turned to see Karen marching up the driveway, clipboard in hand, wearing her usual neatly pressed outfit and that particular look that said she was on a mission. "Good morning." "Daniel," she said, her voice crisp and polite, but with an undertone of authority. "Morning." "Karen," Daniel replied, already sensing what was coming. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Karen didn't smile. She looked at the tables, the boxes, the small crowd browsing around, and then back at Daniel. I wasn't aware that you had gotten approval for a garage sale. Approval? Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. Didn't know I needed one. Well, technically, all community events or sales are supposed to be cleared with the homeowners association, Karen said, flipping through a few pages on her clipboard. It's to make sure there's no disruption, no parking issues, no excess noise. You understand? Daniel nodded slowly. I understand wanting peace and order, sure. But this is just a garage sale, Karen, nothing big. Couple of neighbors stopping by, that's all. Karen sighed. That's what everyone says, Daniel, but these things can get out of hand. Last summer, the Parkers had one, and people were parking all over the street. I had to get it sorted. Laura tried to step in kindly. We made sure cars are parked along one side only. And we'll be done by noon. Karen pursed her lips. Still, you should have let me know. I'm the community coordinator, after all. Daniel smiled patiently. Noted, but it's just a one-day thing. We'll clean up everything afterward. Karen didn't seem satisfied. She started writing something down on her clipboard. I'll need to record this for the HOA report, she said. Daniel couldn't help but chuckle. You're writing me up for a garage sale? This isn't personal, Karen said firmly. Rules are rules. Laura shot her husband a look, silently telling him not to argue. He just shrugged and kept his tone calm. All right, Karen, you do what you have to do. Karen scribbled something, nodded curtly, and walked off. But before she turned the corner, she took out her phone and snapped a few pictures of the sale. Laura sighed. Unbelievable. She's acting like we're breaking the law. Daniel shook his head with a small smile. She just needs something to do. Don't worry about it. They went back to helping customers, pretending not to notice the blinds moving in Karen's window across the street. An hour passed, and the crowd stayed friendly and light. Kids from down the block rode their bikes by, stopping to look at some toys. A young man asked about an old camera Daniel used back in his early detective days. Still works, Daniel said, showing him the shutter click. You've just got to wind it right, the young man grinned. That's awesome. My grandpa had one like this. As Daniel talked with him, he noticed Karen standing at her window again, holding her phone. He saw the glint of her camera lens. She was taking more pictures. Laura noticed too. She's still watching us, Daniel shrugged. Let her. We're not breaking any rules. But deep down, he knew Karen wasn't going to let it go. He'd seen people like her before. The kind who get a little power and feel it's their duty to enforce it, no matter how small the matter. Around 11:15 a.m., as things started to slow down, a car Daniel didn't recognize pulled up near the corner. A man stepped out wearing a neat shirt and sunglasses and looked around. Karen immediately hurried out of her house and walked up to him. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Karen pointing toward his house and waving her clipboard. The man nodded, said something, and took out his phone. Laura noticed the exchange too. Do you think she just called someone? Daniel smiled faintly, not surprised. Wouldn't put it past her. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, a white SUV from City Code Enforcement rolled slowly down the street. It parked across from Daniel's driveway. A middle-aged officer stepped out, wearing a friendly but professional expression. Karen followed close behind, clearly feeling validated. There, that's him, she said loudly enough for Daniel to hear. He's running a full commercial sale without proper authorization. The officer approached with a polite nod. Morning, sir. You hosting this sale? I am, Daniel said calmly, wiping his hands on a rag. Is there a problem? The officer glanced around at the tables, the modest crowd, and the neat setup. It didn't look like a problem at all. We just got a call about a possible unpermitted business operation, he said carefully. Daniel chuckled softly. That'd be a first. This is just me clearing out old stuff, officer, Karen interrupted. He didn't notify the HOA, and there are multiple vehicles parked on the street. It's becoming a disturbance. The officer nodded politely but didn't seem concerned. Well, from what I can see, it looks fine. No blocked driveways, no noise complaints, Karen frowned. But the regulations... Ma'am, the officer said kindly, HOA rules are separate from city regulations. Unless there's an ordinance being violated, this isn't really an issue. Daniel stayed quiet, letting the conversation play out. He could have pulled rank right then and there. After all, he wasn't just any resident. But he preferred to keep things low-key. Karen looked frustrated. So you're not going to do anything? The officer smiled gently. There's nothing to do. He's within his rights to have a private sale. Daniel nodded. Appreciate you coming by, officer. The man smiled. No problem, sir. Have a good day. When the officer left, Karen stood frozen for a moment, clearly thrown off. This isn't over, she muttered before turning back toward her house. Laura exhaled slowly. She's really something else. Daniel just smiled. She's not dangerous, just committed. By noon, the sale began to wind down. The tables were half empty, the driveway quieter now except for the distant sound of kids playing. Daniel leaned back in his folding chair, sipping what was left of his coffee. Laura sat beside him, shaking her head with a laugh. You really stayed calm through all that, he smiled. When you deal with what I deal with at work, this is nothing. She gave him a curious look. You think she knows who you really are? Daniel chuckled. Doubt it. I never bring work home. To her, I'm just another neighbor with too much stuff in the garage. He didn't mind it that way. But little did Karen know, the man she'd just tried to report wasn't just another neighbor. He was the detective chief of the local police department, the one who trained half the officers she'd just tried to call. And as Daniel looked around at his quiet neighborhood, sipping his now cold coffee, he couldn't help but wonder how Karen might react if she ever found out. For now, though, he preferred to keep that secret. After all, the day wasn't over yet, and something told him this wouldn't be the last time Karen made things interesting. After the code enforcement officer drove away, Daniel thought the whole thing was finally over. He figured Karen had gotten it out of her system. Most people would have let it go after the city official said everything was fine. But Karen wasn't like most people. She had a habit of digging into things until she found something to complain about. Laura cleaned up the last of the boxes, wiping dust from her hands. I think that's the end of it, she said, sounding hopeful. Daniel smiled faintly. Let's hope so. I'm not trying to make the HOA's hit list. They both laughed. The sun was higher now and the day was warming up. The crowd had thinned, just a few stragglers walking by. A man stopped to ask about a fishing pole and Daniel gave it to him for $5 just to get rid of it. He wasn't doing this for money. He just wanted space and maybe a quiet afternoon nap afterward. By early afternoon, the tables were mostly empty. Daniel folded a few of them up and carried them into the garage. Laura packed the leftover items into a couple of boxes. We can donate these, she said. Goodwill's still open till 5. Perfect, Daniel said. Let's wrap this up and then maybe order pizza tonight. But before they could finish, the familiar sound of Karen's voice floated across the street. She was talking loudly on her phone, pacing up and down her driveway. I'm telling you, she said, her tone sharp and urgent. He's still out there. There were at least 10 cars earlier. You should have seen it. It's completely against our community rules. Daniel tried to ignore it. He carried another box inside, but her voice carried through the still air like a buzzing mosquito. Laura frowned. She's still at it? Looks like it. Karen's voice grew louder. Yes, I already spoke with the HOA president, but if the board won't act, then maybe the authorities will take this seriously. He can't just ignore the rules. Laura groaned softly. Daniel, she's calling again. He looked over, sighing. Let her. We didn't do anything wrong. But in the back of his mind, Daniel knew that meant more company might show up, and he was right. About 30 minutes later, while he was sweeping the driveway, a familiar sound caught his ear. The low rumble of an engine, followed by a short burst of a siren. He turned his head and saw a black and white police car turning onto the street. Laura froze. Oh no, she didn't. Daniel set the broom aside, his expression calm but slightly amused. She did. The cruiser pulled up slowly, stopping by the curb. 2 officers stepped out. Daniel recognized them both immediately, Officer Brooks and Officer Mills. He'd worked with them for years. Brooks was a young, eager cop still learning the ropes. Mills was a bit older, steady and professional. Karen came marching across her lawn, pointing dramatically toward Daniel's house. There, that's the one. I called earlier. He's been running this all day. Cars everywhere, people all over the place. It's disrupting the neighborhood. The younger officer nodded politely, trying to be respectful. All right, ma'am, thank you. We'll take it from here. Karen crossed her arms but stayed nearby, clearly expecting to witness some kind of enforcement. Brooks and Mills walked up the driveway. Brooks looked like he was trying hard not to smile. Good afternoon, sir, he said in his usual polite tone. Afternoon, Officer Brooks, Daniel said, trying not to grin. The young officer blinked in surprise. realizing who he was talking to. His posture straightened instantly. "Chief Harper?" Daniel nodded casually. "That's me." Mills gave a quick chuckle under his breath. "Well, this just got interesting." Karen, standing a few feet away, looked confused. "Chief, what do you mean, Chief?" Daniel gave her a friendly nod. "Detective Chief, actually. County Police." The color drained from Karen's face as the realization hit. The man she'd been reporting all morning wasn't just any resident. He was one of the highest-ranking officers in the county. Brooks cleared his throat. Ma'am," he said carefully. "Chief Harper here is, well, my boss." Karen blinked rapidly. Your boss?" Mills nodded. "Yep. Chief's been running the department for what, 5 years now?" Daniel smiled slightly. 6, actually. Karen's jaw tightened and she took a small step back. "Oh, I didn't realize, I figured," Daniel said kindly, his voice even and calm. "That's why I didn't make a big deal out of earlier." Karen opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her face flushed pink. Brooks scratched the back of his neck, clearly trying not to laugh. "So, what seems to be the issue here today?" Karen tried to regain her composure. "Well, I thought there was an unauthorized event happening. You see, in our HOA guidelines," Daniel raised a hand gently. "Karen, it's okay. I understand you're trying to keep things orderly. But you called the police on your own neighbor over a garage sale." She looked down at her clipboard, embarrassed. "I just thought it might be a violation." Mills looked around at the tidy driveway, the neatly parked cars, and the small number of people left. "This looks about as harmless as it gets," Brooks nodded. "No traffic issues, no noise, nothing illegal." Karen's voice softened. "I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to make sure rules were followed." Daniel gave her a patient smile. "I respect that. But next time, maybe just come talk to me first. No need to call for backup." That earned a small laugh from both officers. Even Karen cracked a nervous smile, though she still looked mortified. Brooks turned to Daniel. "Sorry for the interruption, Chief. We'll clear this up on our end." Daniel waved it off. "No worries. I know you're just doing your job." The officers got back into their car, and before they left, Mills rolled down his window and called out, "Hey, Chief, if you ever need an extra hand selling that old mower, let me know." Daniel laughed. "It's yours for free if you haul it away." As they drove off, Karen stood frozen in place, still clutching her clipboard. Laura walked over and gently said, "Karen, you okay?" Karen nodded stiffly. I didn't realize who your husband was." Laura smiled kindly. "Don't worry about it." "No harm done?" Karen forced a small laugh, though she clearly wanted to disappear. "Well, I suppose I learned something new today." Daniel smiled politely. "We all have our moments." Karen nodded again, murmured a quick sorry, and hurried back to her house, avoiding eye contact with anyone on the street. Once she was gone, Laura turned to Daniel, trying not to laugh. "You handled that way too calmly." He shrugged. "It's better that way. No point embarrassing her more than she already is." Laura shook her head, smiling. "I can't believe she called the cops on the police chief." "Yeah," Daniel said, chuckling. "That's definitely a new one." The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. Daniel loaded the remaining boxes into his truck and took them to the donation center. When he returned, the neighborhood was quiet again. Karen's curtains were drawn and her car was gone. Maybe she went for a drive to cool off. That evening, Daniel and Laura sat on the porch with their pizza, watching the sunset. The orange light spilled across the lawns and the air was calm. Laura leaned back in her chair. "You think she'll tell the rest of the HOA about what happened?" Daniel took a sip of his drink. "Oh, she'll tell them, all right. But I bet she'll skip a few details." Laura laughed. "Like the part where the officers called you Chief?" "Exactly." They both laughed quietly, letting the moment settle into comfortable silence. As night fell, porch lights blinked on one by one down the street. The sounds of distant laughter and a barking dog filled the air. It was the kind of peaceful evening Daniel had wanted from the start. But deep down he knew this wasn't the end of it. Karen might have been embarrassed, but she wasn't the type to back down forever. She'd probably find another rule, another technicality, something new to fuss over. It wasn't personal. That was just who she was. And as much as Daniel tried to ignore it, a small part of him was curious. Would she treat him differently now that she knew who he was? Would she act more cautious or double down on her sense of control? He didn't have to wonder long. 2 days later, on Monday morning, Daniel pulled out of his driveway in his unmarked police vehicle. As he drove past Karen's house, she was standing by her mailbox, pretending to check her mail but clearly waiting. She gave a small, awkward wave. Daniel smiled and waved back. She hesitated for a moment, then called out, "Morning, Chief." Her voice carried a mix of embarrassment and forced cheer. Daniel smiled. "Morning, Karen. Have a good day." He drove off, chuckling to himself. It seemed peace had been temporarily restored, at least for now. But as the week went on, little things began to happen. A note appeared on his door reminding residents to store. Trash bins out of sight. Another one arrived about approved. Paint colors for exterior trim. Both were written in the same neat handwriting. Laura found them first and rolled her eyes. "You think this is her way of getting back some control?" Daniel laughed. "Probably. I guess it's her version of keeping balance." He didn't take it personally. People like Karen needed order. They needed something to manage, something to feel in charge of. He'd seen it 1,000 times in different forms at work. It wasn't about rules. It was about having a sense of importance. Still, Daniel couldn't help but find it amusing. Every time he saw her now, she acted overly polite, smiling too much and avoiding eye contact for too long. She even dropped off a small box of cookies one afternoon with a note that said, "No hard feelings. Welcome to the neighborhood event committee." Laura laughed so hard when she saw it that she nearly dropped the cookies. "Oh, now she's recruiting you." Daniel smiled. "Guess I've been promoted." That night, as he sat on the porch again, a cool breeze blew through the trees. The neighborhood lights shimmered softly. He thought about how quickly things could turn from tension to laughter, from conflict to understanding. Karen hadn't meant harm. Not really. She was just someone who took rules too seriously in a world where not much else was under her control. Daniel understood that better than anyone. After all, in his line of work, he'd met all kinds of people. Those who broke rules, those who enforced them, and those who just tried to live peacefully in between. He smiled to himself, took another sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair. The garage sale was over. The drama had settled. And for now, the only thing on his mind was how nice it felt to have a quiet evening. Until the next HOA meeting, of course. The week after the garage sale passed quietly, but Daniel could tell things felt different in the neighborhood. Every time he stepped outside, someone seemed to wave or smile a little too enthusiastically. It was as if word had gotten around about what happened. He wasn't surprised. In neighborhoods like this, news traveled faster than a police radio call. Laura noticed it too. On Tuesday evening, she came in from checking the mail with a grin on her face. "Guess what someone slipped in the mailbox?" she said, holding up a folded note. Daniel looked up from the newspaper. "What's that?" "It's from one of the neighbors," she said, opening it. It says, "We heard what happened with Karen. Thank you for handling it so gracefully. You're welcome at our block parties anytime." And there's a smiley face drawn at the bottom. Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, at least they're friendly." Laura sat beside him. "It's funny, isn't it? You try to live quietly and then something like that happens and suddenly everyone knows who you are." He nodded. "Yeah, that's life. Sometimes you don't get to stay invisible." Over the next few days, more neighbors started stopping by. Some just wanted to say hello. Others wanted to share their own Karen stories. A few even hinted that they'd been waiting for someone to stand up to her for a while. But Daniel didn't see it that way. He never wanted to embarrass her. He just wanted to live peacefully. On Thursday afternoon, Daniel was watering his lawn when he saw Karen walking her small dog down the street. She spotted him, hesitated for a second, then smiled awkwardly and crossed over. "Good afternoon." "Chief," she said, her tone overly polite. "Afternoon, Karen," Daniel replied, keeping his voice friendly. "How's your day?" "Oh, busy as always," she said quickly, tugging the leash a bit. "I've been preparing the agenda for next week's HOA meeting. We're reviewing neighborhood event policies, actually." Daniel smiled faintly. "That sounds important." "Yes, well, we want to make sure everything runs smoothly in the future," she said, trying to sound casual. "You know, clear communication, fewer misunderstandings." "That's good," he said, giving her a small nod. "Rules help as long as people don't get lost in them." Karen nodded too quickly. "Exactly. We just want balance." Her dog barked once, and she bent down pretending to fix its collar. "Anyway, I wanted to say again, I'm sorry about last weekend. I really didn't mean to cause any trouble." Daniel smiled gently. "No harm done, Karen. It's all in the past." She seemed relieved. Thank you. I appreciate that. She gave him a final polite nod and continued walking down the street, her little dog trotting along beside her. Laura came out a few moments later, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. Was that her? Yep, Daniel said. I think she's trying to make peace. Laura handed him a glass and sat on the porch step. Well, that's good. Maybe she learned something. Maybe, he said, taking a sip. Or maybe she's planning the next set of rules. Laura laughed. Don't jinx it. But Daniel's prediction wasn't entirely wrong. The following Monday evening, a printed notice appeared in every mailbox in the neighborhood. It was from the HOA, titled, New Guidelines for Community Sales and Events. Laura unfolded theirs at the kitchen table and read aloud. Residents wishing to hold a garage sale or similar event must notify the HOA at least 48 hours in advance and ensure parking does not obstruct street access. She looked up. Sound familiar? Daniel smiled. She really did it. Yep, Laura said. She turned our garage sale into a policy. He laughed softly. At least now everyone knows what to do. Maybe it'll save someone else the trouble. True, Laura said, smiling. You kind of helped improve the system even if she doesn't realize it. Funny how that works, he said, leaning back. That Friday evening, Daniel attended the HOA meeting out of curiosity. He usually avoided them, but after all the attention, he figured it was time to show up. The meeting was held in the community center, a small room with folding chairs, a long table, and a coffee dispenser that always smelled slightly burnt. When he walked in, a few people greeted him warmly. Karen was sitting at the front, organizing papers, her hair neatly tied back, looking more serious than ever. When she saw Daniel, she gave a nervous smile. Chief Harper. Thank you for joining us, she said. Standing up. Please, just Daniel, he said, taking a seat in the back row. The meeting started with updates about landscaping, maintenance fees, and some debate about whether Christmas lights should be allowed before December. Daniel listened quietly, amused by how passionate people could get over the smallest details. Then came the main topic, community events. Karen cleared her throat and began reading her new proposal. In light of recent incidents, I'd like to suggest a clearer structure for how garage sales and gatherings are conducted. This will ensure consistency, safety, and neighborly harmony. A few people exchanged looks. One man in the corner said, You mean the thing with the Harpers? Karen's face flushed slightly. Well, yes, that's one example. It was a misunderstanding, and I take full responsibility for the confusion. But it showed we need clearer rules. Daniel appreciated that she took some accountability, even if she framed it carefully. The room murmured with mixed reactions. Some residents supported the idea. Others thought it was unnecessary. An older man near Daniel raised his hand. To be honest, I don't think anyone had a problem with the garage sale. It was handled fine. Another neighbor added, Yeah, we don't want to have to ask permission every time we clean out our garage. Karen tried to respond, but it was clear she was losing the room. People weren't angry. They were just tired of extra rules. Daniel didn't want to embarrass her, but he also saw a chance to calm things down. He stood up and said, If I can say something? The room quieted. Karen nodded, looking slightly tense. I think Karen's point makes sense, Daniel began. We should have clarity, but we also don't need to turn simple neighborly things into complicated processes. Maybe a balance, just a reminder system instead of formal permission. Several heads nodded immediately. One woman said, That's fair. Karen relaxed a little. Yes, a reminder system. That's what I meant, Daniel smiled kindly. Perfect. Then it sounds like we're all in agreement. The tension in the room eased. The meeting moved on, and by the end of it, people were chatting and even laughing again. Afterward, as Daniel was leaving, Karen caught up with him in the parking lot. Thank you, she said softly, for what you said in there. You didn't have to help me out, Daniel shrugged lightly. We're neighbors, Karen. It's better if we all get along. She nodded slowly. You know, I think I needed that reminder. I get caught up in the rules sometimes. He smiled. You care about the community. That's not a bad thing, just maybe try talking first next time before calling for reinforcements. Karen actually laughed, a real laugh, not the stiff kind. Deal. For the first time, Daniel saw a genuine warmth in her expression. Maybe the wall between them had finally come down a little. Over the next couple of weeks, things in the neighborhood started feeling more relaxed. Karen stopped sending out strict notices. She even began waving at people more, including Daniel and Laura. One Saturday morning, Daniel was out washing his car when Karen approached again, holding a stack of flyers. "Morning. Daniel," she said, catching herself with a smile. "I wanted to invite you and Laura to our spring community fair next weekend. We're setting up food stalls, games, and a small fundraiser for the local animal shelter." Daniel smiled. "That sounds nice. Count us in." "Great," she said brightly. "And, just so you know, this time I made sure to get all the proper permits." Daniel chuckled. "I had no doubt." The day of the fair turned out better than anyone expected. The weather was perfect, sunny but with a light breeze. Kids ran around with balloons, neighbors mingled, and someone played soft music from a portable speaker. Daniel and Laura walked around, chatting with people. He noticed how even Karen seemed different. She wasn't policing things or checking rules. She was laughing, helping a family set up a lemonade stand, and even playing with her little dog. At one point, she walked over with a smile. "See, I can relax too," she joked. Daniel laughed. "I'm impressed." The event went on all afternoon, and as the sun began to set, people started packing up, smiling and waving goodbye. It was the most peaceful the neighborhood had felt in a long time. Later that evening, as Daniel sat on his porch, Laura joined him with 2 mugs of tea. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd see the day Karen organized something people actually enjoyed." Daniel smiled. "Guess everyone's capable of change." Laura leaned against him. "Maybe you rubbed off on her," he chuckled. "Or maybe she just needed a reminder that community isn't about control. It's about connection." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of laughter from down the street. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his officers. "Got a call today from a concerned resident named Karen Miller. She wanted to thank the department for their professionalism last time. Thought you'd like to know." Daniel laughed softly, showing the message to Laura. "She's come full circle." Laura smiled. "You might have just converted her." "Maybe," he said. "But even if she slips back into her old ways, I think she's learned to think twice before dialing for backup." They both laughed quietly, the sound blending with the night air. The neighborhood lights twinkled across the lawns, and for the first time in a while, Daniel felt like everything was in harmony. There were no angry calls, no tension, no drama, just neighbors learning, growing, and trying to do a little better. And deep down, Daniel couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of quiet victory he valued most. Not the kind from his police work, but the kind that started right at home. A few weeks passed after the community fair, and the neighborhood felt lighter than it had in months. People were friendlier. Lawns looked neat, but not obsessively perfect. Kids played freely without worried glances from windows. Even Karen seemed calmer. Daniel enjoyed the peace. For once, he could step outside, mow his lawn, or wash his car without feeling like he was being watched. Sometimes he even caught Karen walking by, smiling and waving like an entirely new person. One sunny Saturday morning, Daniel and Laura were sitting on their porch drinking coffee. The breeze carried the smell of blooming flowers, and a few birds perched on the telephone wire. Everything felt normal, easy, calm, the kind of morning Daniel cherished. Laura looked at him with a small grin. "You know, I think you changed this neighborhood more than your job ever could." Daniel chuckled. "Me? I didn't do anything." "You handled things differently," she said. "You didn't argue. You didn't embarrass her. You just showed her respect even when she didn't deserve it. And now look, she's practically part of the welcome committee." He smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." As they talked, Karen walked up their driveway holding a clipboard. But this time she looked cheerful, not stern. "Morning," she called out, waving. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Daniel said, setting his mug down. "What brings you by?" Karen smiled nervously. "Well, the HOA board asked me to help organize our next event. We're thinking of doing a neighborhood safety awareness day, workshops, demonstrations, maybe even a guest speaker." Laura brightened. "That's actually a great idea." Karen nodded quickly. "I thought so too. And well, I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to help? You know, since you're, experienced in that field." Daniel smiled. "You want me to give a safety talk?" "Exactly," Karen said eagerly. "You could talk about home safety, scams, maybe even basic first aid. People would love it." and it might help bring everyone together again. Daniel thought for a moment. He didn't usually like mixing work with his personal life, but something about the way she asked felt genuine. She wasn't bossy or controlling this time, just hopeful. "All right," he said finally. "Count me in." Karen's eyes lit up. "Really? Oh, that's wonderful. I'll put your name down as our main speaker. I promise I'll handle all the setup and scheduling." "Sounds good," he said with a nod. "Just let me know when." Karen left looking genuinely happy, and Laura turned to him with a teasing smile. "See, she's a fan now," he laughed. "Let's not go that far." Over the next week, Karen threw herself into planning the event. She went door to door with flyers, posted signs at the entrance of the neighborhood, and even got a few local sponsors, a security company, a locksmith, and a small coffee shop. She was still meticulous, but there was a warmth in how she handled things this time. Daniel prepared his notes for the talk. He wanted to keep it simple, just common sense safety tips, awareness advice, and maybe a few light-hearted stories from his years in the field. When the day finally came, the event took place at the community park. The weather was perfect, and there were more people than anyone expected. Families, retirees, young couples, even teenagers. Karen was everywhere, greeting people, checking tables, and making sure everything ran smoothly. She looked proud, and for once Daniel was glad to see her enjoying herself. "Chief Harper," she called out as he arrived, motioning him toward the small stage. "You're our closing speaker. Everyone's excited to hear from you." He smiled modestly. "Let's just hope I don't bore anyone." Laura joined him near the front row, waving to a few neighbors. The air smelled of coffee and grilled food from a nearby booth. Kids ran around with balloons, and someone was handing out pamphlets about home safety. After a few short introductions, Karen took the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. I know our community's been through a lot of changes lately, but today shows what happens when we work together. And now I'd like to welcome our final speaker, someone who doesn't just protect our streets but also happens to be one of our very own neighbors, Detective Chief Daniel Harper." Applause spread across the park. Daniel stepped up with a smile, adjusting the mic. "Thank you, Karen. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I promise to keep this short, because I know the burgers smell a lot better than my stories." A few people laughed, and the tension eased. He began his talk, keeping his tone light but sincere. He spoke about everyday safety, locking doors, avoiding scams, checking in on neighbors. He told a few short, funny stories about mistakes people made and what he'd learned from years on the job. People listened closely, nodding, laughing, and asking questions. When he finished, he ended with a simple message. At the end of the day, safety isn't just about alarms or locks. It's about community, looking out for each other, knowing your neighbors. That's what really makes a difference. The audience clapped warmly, and Karen looked proud as she took the mic again. "That was perfect, Daniel. Thank you so much." The rest of the afternoon went smoothly. The event wrapped up with families chatting and laughing, people exchanging phone numbers, and a general sense of unity that hadn't been there before. As Daniel and Laura helped fold up chairs, Karen came over, still glowing with excitement. "That was a huge success. Everyone loved your talk. It was a good day," Daniel said with a smile. "You did great, Karen, seriously." She looked touched. "Thank you. I just wanted to prove that not every HOA event has to end in drama." Laura laughed softly. "Mission accomplished," Karen smiled wider. "I couldn't have done it without you two." By the time the sun started setting, the park was quiet again. Daniel walked home with Laura, feeling satisfied. It wasn't often that his job and his personal life came together in such a good way. But peace, as always, had a way of being temporary. A few days later, Daniel got a call at work from one of his officers. "Hey, Chief, you might want to hear this. We got a complaint from your neighborhood. Noise disturbance, minor argument, nothing major." Daniel frowned. "From who?" The officer hesitated. "Caller didn't say, but the report mentioned your street." Daniel sighed. "All right, I'll check it out after my shift." When he got home that evening, he noticed two neighbors, the Martins and the Ellisons, standing in their driveways, clearly upset. Their voices carried across the street. "I told you to move your car," Mr. Martin shouted. "It's a public road." Mr. Ellison snapped back. "You don't own the street." Karen stood between them, trying to calm things down, her clipboard in one hand. "Gentlemen, please, let's keep our voices down. We can resolve this through proper channels." Daniel parked his car and walked over. Everything okay here? Karen looked relieved to see him. Oh, Daniel, thank goodness. Just a small misunderstanding about parking during the event setup tomorrow. Mr. Martin crossed his arms. He's been parking that truck in front of my house all week. Mr. Ellison shot back, it's not illegal. Daniel raised a hand calmly. All right, let's take a breath. No one's breaking any laws here, but maybe out of courtesy you can move it for now. Ellison sighed and nodded. Fine, I'll move it. Martin mumbled a reluctant thank you and went inside. Karen looked embarrassed. I swear I was just trying to help. I didn't mean to make it worse, Daniel smiled reassuringly. You did fine. People just need to cool off sometimes. She sighed. I thought if we had more communication, things like this wouldn't happen. Communication's good, Daniel said, but people will always find something to disagree about. That's just life, she smiled weakly. You're probably right. The next day, the new event, a neighborhood cleanup day, went well enough, but Daniel noticed something interesting. Karen was still trying to help everyone, but she'd started second-guessing herself. She hesitated before giving directions, looked nervous when people disagreed, and constantly checked whether things were all right. Later, Laura mentioned it. She's scared to make another mistake. Yeah, Daniel said thoughtfully. She lost her confidence after everything. I think she's trying so hard not to upset anyone that she's forgetting to just be herself. That evening, as they sat outside again, Karen came over, holding 2 small potted plants. Hi, she said softly. These are for you. As a thank you for everything, Laura smiled warmly. That's so sweet. You didn't have to. Karen shrugged. You've both been kind to me even when I wasn't exactly easy to deal with, Daniel smiled. We've all got our moments. Karen nodded slowly. I used to think following every rule was what made a good community. But now I realize it's more about trust. I didn't have much of that before. Laura touched her arm gently. Well, you're earning it now. Karen smiled, her eyes soft. I hope so. After she left, Daniel looked at the plants on the porch railing, 1 lavender, 1 rosemary. Laura smiled. She's trying. Yeah, Daniel said quietly. And that's more than most people do. The weeks that followed were calm again. Karen seemed happier, lighter. The neighbors got along better. The HOA meetings became shorter and friendlier. It was as if everyone had finally learned how to live together without stepping on each other's toes. One evening, Daniel was sitting on his porch, the smell of rosemary in the air, when Karen walked by with her dog. She waved and smiled. Hey, Daniel, I heard the department's hosting a charity run next month. Need any volunteers? He grinned. Actually, yeah. You interested? Count me in, she said. I'll handle registration. But I promise I won't call anyone for backup this time. Daniel laughed. Deal. As she walked away, Laura came out with 2 cups of coffee. You two are quite the team now, she said, handing him one. He smiled. Funny how things work out. Sometimes the people who challenge you the most end up teaching you the most. Laura leaned on the railing beside him. And sometimes they turn into friends. He nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Exactly. The sky turned golden as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, content. Daniel smiled to himself, thinking about how much things had changed, not just for Karen, but for everyone. Maybe all it took was a little patience, a little humility, and a few second chances. And in that moment, as the breeze rustled through the trees and laughter drifted from down the street, he realized something simple but true. Sometimes the best kind of justice wasn't served in a courtroom or a police report. Sometimes it happened right in your own neighborhood, between ordinary people just trying to do better. The next few months went by peacefully, and the neighborhood finally felt like a real community. People waved when they passed by, kids rode their bikes down the sidewalks, and even the occasional barking dog didn't stir up the same drama it once did. There was laughter, small talk, and weekend gatherings that didn't feel forced. Daniel often found himself smiling at how far things had come. The tension that used to hang in the air like static had faded, replaced by something lighter, something almost friendly. One evening, as he returned home from work, he noticed a flyer pinned to his mailbox. It was handwritten, not printed. Neighborhood Appreciation Night, hosted by the HOA location, Community Center time, Saturday, 6 p.m. below that in smaller letters. to celebrate everyone who helped make our neighborhood a better place. Daniel smiled. He could already tell who had organized it. That Saturday, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, soft orange light bathed the houses. People were walking toward the community center, carrying dishes, desserts, and lawn chairs. It reminded him of small-town gatherings he'd seen growing up, simple, honest, and warm. Laura came out of the house wearing a light blue sweater, holding a tray of cookies. "Ready?" she asked with a smile. "Let's do it," Daniel said, taking the tray from her as they headed down the street. Inside the community center, tables were decorated with candles and paper flowers. Someone had set up fairy lights along the walls, giving the place a gentle glow. Music played softly from a speaker in the corner, old songs, the kind that made people hum along without realizing it. Karen was at the front, talking to a few people and making sure everything was in order. When she saw Daniel and Laura walk in, her face lit up. "You made it," she said cheerfully. "I was worried you'd have to work late." "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel said. "Looks like you outdid yourself again." Karen smiled proudly. "I just wanted to end the year on a good note, something that reminded everyone how far we've come." "Well," Laura said kindly, "it's beautiful. You've really turned this place around." Karen looked touched. "Thank you. That means a lot." As the evening went on, people chatted and laughed, sharing stories about the year. The garage sale incident came up more than once, usually followed by laughter and a few good-natured jokes. Even Karen laughed about it now, shaking her head every time someone mentioned the call. At one point, Karen tapped a spoon against her glass and cleared her throat. "Everyone, can I have your attention for just a minute?" The crowd quieted, smiling and waiting for her to speak. "I just wanted to say something," she began. "When I first joined the HOA, I thought my job was to make sure everything was perfect. Every lawn, every mailbox, every rule. I thought if I kept everything in order, we'd all be happy. But I was wrong. What really makes a neighborhood great isn't the rules, it's the people. The kindness, the patience, the willingness to help each other." She paused for a moment, looking around at all the familiar faces. "I didn't always get that right, but I've learned a lot this past year, especially from one person who showed me what true leadership looks like. So Daniel, if you don't mind, could you come up here for a second?" The crowd turned toward him, clapping and smiling. Daniel felt his face warm a little as he stood up and walked to the front. Karen smiled at him, holding a small wooden plaque. It read, "In appreciation of outstanding community service or for keeping our neighborhood safe, kind, and united." She handed it to him with both hands. "Thank you for reminding me what it really means to look out for your neighbors." The room filled with applause. Daniel smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you," he said softly. "But really, I didn't do anything special. I just wanted to live in a place where people respected each other. And now we do. That's something we all built together." Karen nodded, her eyes bright. "Maybe, but you started it." The applause started again, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt something he rarely felt in his line of work: complete peace. Later that evening, after the food was finished and the laughter had died down to soft murmurs, Daniel and Laura helped clean up. Karen was stacking chairs nearby, humming to herself. "You know," Daniel said as he picked up a few cups, "you really should consider running for something bigger than the HOA." Karen laughed. "Like what? City council? Why not?" he said, half serious. "You've got the energy for it." She smiled, shaking her head. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm happy just keeping this place running smoothly." Laura joined them with a grin. And without incident, Karen laughed again. "Yes, let's hope so." When everything was packed away, the three of them stood outside under the streetlights. The night was cool and quiet, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Karen looked around at the houses, the soft glow in the windows, the gentle hum of crickets. "You know, for the first time in a long time, it actually feels like home here." Daniel nodded. "It always was. It just needed the right kind of attention." She smiled, looking at him thoughtfully. "You taught me something important, you know, that sometimes doing the right thing isn't about enforcing rules, as it's about understanding people." He smiled back. "That's a lesson I had to learn too. In my job, we deal with rules all the time, but the best officers aren't the ones who just follow them. They're the ones who know when to show compassion." Karen nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." They said goodnight and went their separate ways. As Daniel and Laura walked home, she slipped her hand into his. You know, she said softly, you might have changed more lives here than you ever did on the force. He smiled. Maybe. But I think the best part is knowing we can actually make a difference just by being decent.